the window now.
Okay. And instead of just introducing you to our story bridge, based on what we're doing with the No-Co showcases, I'm going to relate what we do with our story bridge to North Country story collections and regional history. I'm going to go a little beyond our region. In fact, all the way out to Alaska. And hopefully what I'm doing will be interesting. At the end, I have a kind of call to action for you. So who am I? Well, I do have an MLS, and I was early in my career a school and public librarian, but I kind of went into the family business and I ended up in New York politics, moved down to DC 42 years ago, and had a career dealing with lobbying, environmental issues, was among the people who started the recycling field, and then CEO of an association. I lived half the year in the Adirondacks and Keene Valley, half the year in DC, and the projects I'm going to talk about came from the work I do year-round with the Keene Valley Library. Just to clarify the objectives, by listening to this presentation, you're going to learn about our story bridge and 2 local story projects in Keene and Lake Placid. I'm going to show you how our StoryBridge story collections from the North Country and across the country have been used. And you'll be able to listen to stories. And I ask you, as you listen, to envision how they can be used to share cultural heritage. So this is a presentation with several calls to action in it. We want you to be our voice as we grow in the North Country and across the nation, but there are a bunch of things you can do to join us. As Christy said, hold your questions till the end, but if it's something like, Jerry, we can't see the slide or something like that, let me know. Christy will stay in the chat to keep us going. And then a sort of, I don't know if disclaimer is the right word, but I'm going to be transitioning between different media. And so, have a little patience if it doesn't work perfectly as we move forward. So even though you were told this is a presentation about our story bridge, you need to understand where it came from first. Where it came from is a project called Adirondack Community. It's at myadirondackstory.org. And this is a project of the Keene Valley Library. This is the website. You'll understand more about these sections as I move forward. Home and About Us page, a page to hear the stories, podcast, teacher's guide, the ability to share your story, and read media about what we're doing. And so with this homepage with an Adirondack feel, what is Adirondack Community? So it's a multi-year local history project. We collect and organize audio stories and related photographs just from the town of Keene. We use a platform to collect the stories on. We post them on a website. What's different from the traditional oral histories you might have been involved in is that maybe I'm a little too negative or cynical, so forgive me, but so many people collect oral histories and then they are like an hour or two and they're sitting on the shelf, gather dust, and then when they do want to play them, they don't even have the hardware to play them on anymore. The difference here is that the stories are 3 to 5 minutes. That's it. Someone could tell a multi-part story. They could tell stories again. They aren't written out ahead. We have a technique we teach on just sitting someone down as they're nervous and feel lost, getting a great story out of them, putting some photos on it that scroll, and immediately getting it on the website in 8 categories selected by the community. And a story can be in 1, 2, or 3 categories. So if you go to the Adirondack Community website and you want to hear a story, you end up at a page that looks like this. And we held focus groups with people in the community when we started. We released this June 15th, 2019, to figure out for our particular community, what are the categories that are meaningful? And those categories were arts and culture, catastrophes, work, people, outdoor activities, daily life, community, and the natural and man-made environment. And just imagining yourself clicking on the website, let's say you want to hear a story in people. Well, what happens is you get to one of several people pages, and you see one of the photos and the title and the storyteller, and then you click on a particular story you want, and I'm going to play that story, Who Is That, by Paul Martin. Just give me a little signal and let me know that it's working, that you can hear the sound.
My name is Paul R. Martin, and when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I started caddying at the Au Club, as many boys did from the area. The younger boys would shag balls for the pro. The older boys would carry bags around the course and eventually carry 2 bags. And that was our big money maker. Mrs. Jerome Hunsker, from time to time, used to come over in the morning and ask if she might have 2 of the young boys to come over and work on her flower garden. Her husband, Jerome Hunsker, for many years was head of aeronautics at MIT and used to summer at the club every year. Well, one particular morning, she happened to get the 2 Wilson boys, Kenneth and Wesley. They were 2 farm boys. They lived on the Crawford farm down at the intersection of 9 and 73. And they liked going over there. They didn't mind working in the dirt, and really it was very muddy. Her flower gardens were in a swampy area, and you would get totally covered with mud. But also, she always wanted to make lunch for the boys. She'd set a card table up on the porch, and she'd make soup and a sandwich. And I think that goes back to the days when, during the Depression, the caddies were fed at the club in the helps dining room adjacent to the kitchen. Well, this particular morning at about 10 o'clock, Mrs. Hunsker came out on the porch and yelled, "Boys, boys, come up, please." Well, Kenneth turned to Wesley and said, "It isn't lunchtime. What do we, I wonder what she wants." So up they go. And they're standing there with their hands dripping the mud. And she yells, "Charles, Charles." And out comes this tall gentleman with receding hair, very thin, big smile on his face. And she said, "Boys, I'd like you to meet Charles Lindbergh." Well, he stuck out his hand, Mr. Lindbergh. Wesley put out his hand, which was all mud, and instantly pulled it back. And Charles Lindbergh said, "No, Wesley, it's okay. I'm always working on airplane engines and my hands get greasy. Don't worry about that." Well, he shook the hands of both boys. They didn't have lunch that day, but when they came back to the clubhouse, or back to the caddy shack, I was just coming in from the round that I had been on that morning, and it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And Wesley Wilson comes up to me, and he says, "Paul, who the hell is Charles Lindbergh?" I was surprised, of course, but then he told me the story that I just told you.
And that was now, I think, 85-year-old Paul Martin telling the story of, his early teen years. Did we know Charles Lindbergh was in the Adirondacks? It's part of our heritage here. And we have collected stories of the past and the present in the town of Keene that tell us who's been there, who's lived there, who's living there now. What do they do in those 8 categories? And I just love this because of the ending and the kids not knowing who they met, but knowing enough to be polite. Now, after we started telling stories and we had worked so hard to get the appropriate 8 categories for our community, we realized that there were other themes that were popping up. And so we made podcasts. Now, there was another reason for the podcast. As you know, our internet isn't great in the Adirondacks. And with a podcast, you can download it to a tablet or a phone or even a computer and listen to it while you're traveling and listen without internet access. So the podcasts are 4 or 5 stories with some musical interludes and some text, tying threads between the stories. And we were surprised in the beginning that we didn't have a category to fit social justice and social change stories in. We didn't even expect we'd have social justice and social change stories. So the way we communicated those stories and the uniqueness of them and how they tied to each other and how they were very North Country was by making a podcast. Well, since then, we now have 18 podcasts that are subsets of the different categories or tie different stories together. And one of the ones we absolutely love that we did last fall was Keene Central School 8th graders, where 8th graders told stories and we put them together in a podcast. And we have a project where we do 8th graders and 12th graders each year at Keene Central School. So as I said, we started this June 15th, 2019. Most of that time has been COVID. It's a volunteer project. We have some money to pay for hardware, software that we need and some people to help us. Go into the chat right now, and if you would, tell me how many stories you think we've collected, knowing it's been almost totally in COVID, and knowing how hard it is for people during this period. So just throw some numbers in there and let me know how many stories you think we've collected just in the town of Keene. Lately, because we've been getting some great coverage, people haven't been answering what I thought. I thought they would pick like 50, 75. Well, everyone's putting these giant numbers in it, but the giant numbers aren't that far off. And thank you for putting in your numbers. We have 227 stories, 18 podcasts. We started with 150 names that people suggested the focus group. Maybe the most interesting number is that in our town of 1,100, over 6,000 people have gone to the website to listen to the stories. We have 500 people follow our Facebook page where I post stories Wednesdays and Saturdays, so it's a curated collection. We have over 300 people that we tell stories and we solicit. And for those 18 podcasts, they've been listened to over 2,000 times. A lot of the success has been because of OurStoryBridge, and I'll explain that in a sec, but a lot has been because of the pandemic. And I'll explain why that's been important. Now, when we started this, even before we started, we marketed. This is what we're going to be doing. We need you to tell your stories with press releases and a document, a boilerplate document describing what we're doing, and posters and banners and, a code to go right to the website and with articles and business cards for appointments. And I'm posting it everywhere. You probably see about once a month I post on Nyland's listserv. Thank you, Christy. And we have community events, and we have, as I said, the Facebook page for this. Getting the ideas out that this is coming, tell your story, and then tell your story, come to the website, listen to the stories. And the result is we've gotten a lot of great press in the North Country. And even my favorite story from Mountain Lake PBS. And let me just play this quick story for you.
Many other residents are also sharing their stories and memories of Irene. More than 200 in all are part of the My Adirondack Story website. It's a collection of 3 to 5 minute stories about life and living in the Adirondacks. And several are from people who recount what they experienced during Tropical Storm Irene.
Our home is on the east branch of the Elba River. And on August 28th, 2011, that river was in our house.
In fact, one story is about someone's house guest who needed chemo in New York City, and how the town pulled together and found a way to build a sort of wooden bridge and get them out so they could get to New York City for their chemo.
Jerry Huntley and the Keene Valley Library have teamed up to collect the stories on the My Adirondack Story website. They're also offering to help communities across the country create similar projects. You can learn more about that effort called OurStoryBridge, as well as hear all the stories from the Adirondacks at myadirondackstory.org. Many other residents are also sharing their...
And so we were really appreciative for that story. And in fact, prepared 2 podcasts with stories about Irene that were really moving. But our press coverage now is national, even beyond local. And this was a great story on the Our Town Civic Association's website about Adirondack Community, about our growth into our story bridge very recently. And you can Google it through the title. Or in fact, I'm going to give Christy that as one of the links to put up with the website. So what's so exciting? Well, we were trying to get to 200 stories by last summer, and we exceeded it. And what's really interesting is all the storytellers are scared. They're nervous. They might cancel. We might have to drag them in by their teeth. But as soon as they tell their story, they're so excited, they're so thankful, and they just kind of jump up out of the chair and say, I can't wait to tell other people and have them come in. And that's what's happened in our town of 1100. Everyone's talking about it. And we found that during COVID, people were really talking about it and saying that they found comfort in especially the catastrophe stories of how people stick together. North Country people take care of each other. And they've got a record as a result. We have a bunch of COVID stories of life during the crisis. And then the fact that there were other themes like social justice and social change that we didn't expect that popped up. Black Lives Matter stories in a white population. What we learned was young and old don't know who lives in the town of Keene. They don't know who's lived here. They don't know who's been here. And by just popping on a website, listening to one 5-minute story, and usually you get hooked, you're learning about the community. But we had 2 very specific goals. One was to capture stories before the storytellers are gone. So 2/3 of our storytellers are over 65. North Country population skews old. We have unique stories to tell. We want to make sure that we collect them in the media of today. That second goal is that you know what it's like for kids in the North Country. In Keene Valley, we have a great school, and most of the kids almost all go to college, and then they move away. And, I don't know if you've been working with the Northern Forest Center or listening to some of their webinars, but they're among the groups tackling the fact that our young people move away. But let's say they go to college and they don't make it. How are they to have the message reinforced that if they come back and live in Keene, there are great occupations, there are great people that will support them, there are ways to be involved with the community and have a rich and satisfying life? We want them to learn that by listening to the stories of the heritage of our town on this website. And so they're taught in the schools, and the kids tell stories. And again, everything's on a website, easy to get to. So, knowing what Adirondack Community is, let me tell you about our story bridge. A few months after we started Adirondack Community, we thought, hey, maybe we've got something. Maybe other communities and organizations can do what we did. And so on September 29th, 2020, this website was released, ourstorybridge.org, and I gave a speech that day to the Association of Rural and Small Libraries. And it felt like the world changed, especially because I'm a volunteer and I will stay a volunteer. And this has become more than a full-time job. So what is our Story Bridge? It is a free resource and toolkit for producing a crowdsourced community online story project, emphasizing audio history collecting and sharing, based on Adirondack Community. And any library, any community, any historical society, any issue-oriented organization that wants to do it, will help them walk through every step of making it happen. People have been really, have a stronger interest in their heritage since COVID. And I hate saying we're at the right place at the right time, but it's increased the importance. Our mission is to be a resource and toolkit for projects across the country that preserve and circulate local audio stories, past and present, through accessible online media. To promote, building, and assist with the deployment of these resources in communities. And we don't describe communities as just Town of Keene, geographic. Of course, geographic, cultural, socioeconomic, racial, organizational strata. So it can be an issue-oriented organization too. And with the result that we strengthen the communities by sharing stories and encourage younger generations to become engaged community members. So on this website is the toolkit. And remember that anyone who reads the tools on this website then gets in touch with us and they're ready to start their project and we help them. The first thing in the toolkit is the user guide. It's a book, and probably, I hope, any question you have swirling through your head about, oh, how does one do this, is in this. The communities that have started their story projects say everything's there, and they've really just asked me a few questions. And so it's got an introduction and why your community should start a project, FAQs right at the top, timetable for planning, like 40 steps. You don't have to do all of them, but just to get you into it, what kind of personnel you need, budgeting, grants, and fundraising. I ask you, if you go on the website and look at the user guide, you download it, and it's been downloaded 500 times already, that you don't look at the budgeting page, because the budget I put in there was, we had these grants, and this is what we spent to make it happen. But then we gradually went to volunteer labor, like most communities are doing, or having, their part-time library staff or whatever do the labor part, because the costs for hardware and software are just a couple of $1,000s a year. And then I put in budgeting, grants, and fundraising, how you build partnerships and specifics on using the technology and the software, how do you get storytellers to come in, how do you collect and process and post the stories. And marketing materials you can use. And this user guide is updated. It's in desktop publishing, and the version that'll be up probably the first week of May will include a lot of things that communities who are doing this suggested I put into it to make it easier for those of you who start now. Now, linked to that user guide and also on the website in the toolkit are 10 videos that give you specifics on how to do things. You know, how to get a good story out of someone, how to get them to even come in and take a story. How do you post them to a website? How do you start telling the story and use the memory platform, which we recommend, to collect the story? Then we have sample documents, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel with everything we did and copy what we did. You know, people say that there are different reasons for their communities and organizations to start. And if you think of yours, and our StoryBridge project helps appreciate the history that shaped a community, make what made it what it is today, what it can become, create closer bonds between residents. We hope that we have promoted connections that lead to neighborly acts of kindness. We need kindness. We're preserving stories that would be lost. We're engaging younger generations. We're educating residents and visitors and getting them to feel like a part of this community and help this community. And we celebrate what makes it unique. We attract new people around the country, because there's 6,000 unique users on the website, all of a sudden know about the town of Keene. We reveal pockets of histories and connections people didn't know about. Especially important in COVID, we've been able to acknowledge the catastrophes, the tragedies, the challenges, unravel puzzles of who's who and why streets are named. And it's also reignited a passion for our archives, where people now go into the archives to ask for information that they started hearing about in the stories. And we're meeting our audience where they are online. I mean, this very moving quote last summer, Debbie Rice in Keene said to me, on cold winter evenings in our harsh Adirondack climate, I often felt very sad about COVID, so I listened to stories on Adirondack Community and hear about people in this community helping each other through multiple disasters and challenges. The stories warm my heart and helped me get through COVID winter. Now, starting our StoryBridge, we have made this website, all the tools free to anyone who wants it. But one of the first communities that did it was Lake Placid, with their website called North Elba Narratives. And it was started by their historical society, which runs their museum, to celebrate what makes the area unique. Their stories are stories of New York heritage, just like the Adirondack communities are. And so let's listen to one of them. As you can imagine, they've got a category on sports, the Olympics. And let's listen to a story by Jim Rogers about Lake Placid and the 1980 Olympics.
My name is Jim Rogers, and I'm talking about the Olympics and Lake Placid hosting the Winter Games. How in the world can a little community like Lake Placid, who talks about 2,500 people, not fair because it has a lot of outside, host the Olympics? It wasn't easy to convince the world or TV that we could do the job. It was a big deal to get the support of the big people like New York State, or the US government, or television. And that was our biggest job. We weren't sophisticated enough, nor were we big enough to host the games. And we had to overcome all of that, and with very little payback. The federal government ended up giving us $89 million, I think, maybe. The state government backed us in many ways with police support, with highway support, with that kind of thing. We did get the support, and it started off rough. We had a problem with transportation. The state,
Well, if you want to hear the rest of that story, you're going to have to go to Lake Placid Narratives, North Elba Narratives yourself. But I just want to give you a feel for it and have you imagine looking in the categories they collected in, the kind of stories that are on their website. Well, it's not just New York. The third OurStoryBridge project was a project by the Igiugig Tribal Library in Alaska. And their website, in fact, is now, and their stories are being translated to their native language, Yupik. And this has started a trend where they got a grant, and OurStoryBridge is in kind to it, where over the next 10 months, we'll have 3 more Alaskan tribal communities with story projects. I'm not going to tell all the stories I've queued up. I just want to give you a taste. But when you go back and you'll see the link that Chrissy will post, one of my favorite stories is in their people category. And it's the story of Alice Zakar, who recently died, told by her daughter-in-law. And it's a story of tribal medicine and healing. And it's also the story of love in a family, and a woman, Alice, who had many handicaps in her life, but grew to be a woman who helped her family and helped her community in the Alaskan Native way. And the Tribal Council President, Alexandra Salmon, has been really excited and has helped us promote this for other Indigenous communities around the country, because she has said that we grow stronger when we share our stories. We preserve local knowledge. We strengthen community. We highlight the value of small and rural places, and we create increased opportunity for us to understand each other. Well, the second one after Adirondack Community was in Tremonton, Utah. Our Bear River Valley Stories, our heritage in story. And their categories ended up similar to ours. And I'm going to play a story called Getting to School in 1926. Listen carefully. You might catch an interesting surprise in this story.
Johnson, and when I was 5 years old, I started school, and we lived over a mile, probably a mile and a half away from school. So I had to ride the old workhorse to get there. Now he was broad-backed and slow, and I wasn't afraid, but I just sat on him with my legs out in front of me because I couldn't dangle them over the side. He was too wide. And I rode that length about halfway, and then the the horse would go down in the irrigation ditch that was along the side of the road, and he would wade that ditch the other half mile to where the ditch would turn and go into the canal. And when we got to the end, I was so scared because he had to lunge out of the ditch. It was deep. It wasn't just a shallow deep. It was a shallow one. It was very deep. So I'd hang on to the reins and he'd start to lunge and I'd fall off. But luckily I'd fall off on the road instead of back in the ditch. And I was always so scared that I'd end up in the ditch. Then I would just walk on across the road to the schoolhouse, and the horse would walk over to my grandparents' house. That was the end of the day.
And so that was Getting to School in 1926 by Edith Hunsaker Bronson. I'm saying Hunsaker out loud because I can't imagine you noticed, but that story about Charles Lindbergh was at the home of Jerome C. Hunsaker. And when Tremonton, Utah posted their first stories, they had 30-something stories, 10 or 11 were from people named Hunsakers. And it's not a very common name. So we asked them to do some research. And I told a few people in Keene, is there still a Hunsaker here? And some people told me that there was a Jerome C. Hunsaker who still had a home on the property of the Ausable Club. Long story short, the family who lives at the Ausable Club was the same family in the Lindbergh story, but going back a few levels in their family was Abraham Hunsaker, who had he was born in 1912. No, he was born in 1812. Had a mother who would lie in bed, read the Bible, and say, I don't believe in organized religion, but we'll have a vision. Abraham Hunsaker, as a young man after he got married to his wife, Eliza, met the first Mormons who were organizing, Joseph Smith, in upstate New York. Ended up going to Utah, left his wife in a covered wagon in Council Bluffs, Iowa, to start the Mormons, was diverted to Mexico to be part of the Mexican brigade that the Mormons had started to fight the Mexicans so Utah could be part of the United States. And when they got there, Utah already had become part of the United States. He went back to Salt Lake City, went to Council Bluffs, Iowa, got his wife, moved to Honeyville outside of Salt Lake City, became the Bishop of Honeyville. And Honeyville is a few minutes from Tremonton, Utah. So all these Hunsakers who told their stories in Tremonton, Utah, are relatives of a family with a home in Keene and another home in Boston. It is a small world. Stories connect us. And this was absolutely amazing. So since we started, and I'll give all these links to Christy, we are growing all over the country. And it's been amazing. And we have another part of what we do. If you go to Adirondack Community, click Teacher's Guide. Same thing. If you go to OurStoryBridge, Teacher's Guide is part of the toolkit. And in the Teacher's Guide, we have resources that teachers can use to use the stories in their classroom. They are primary sources with audio and visual content. They're in the media students will listen to, doing all the existing stories. And we just released an update March 1st. There are over 300 stories and podcasts from across the country. So recently I did an update podcast to 18 on this slide that can be used in a class. Elementary, middle school, high school, college classes. And right before I went online, I got a request for something big they want to do. They're already using it at Paul Smith's and Clarkson, but something even bigger they want to do within our StoryBridge project. These stories have relevance beyond the community's borders. Yeah, I could have just played you New York stories because this is about New York heritage. But I wanted you to see what others are collecting and envision how they could be used and how kids could connect what they're learning in the classroom to the real world. Teachers can assign stories as homework, play them in the classroom, suggest them for activities. A teacher can present them to introduce a topic. Then maybe the kids will listen the rest of the time because they hook them in the first few minutes. They can guide kids to tell stories like we do in Keene Valley, teaching them organization, public speaking, and pulling out their creativity. And suggest that students use them in research and writing. Now, these documents that are there are a how-to document that leads you to this document, Story Summaries, where there are summaries of the more than 300 stories, 2 sentences each, and a link you click and you get to the story. And also some very specific categories that are relevant. Even further, for middle and high school is the story selection chart. All 300 stories categorized by 27 subjects taught middle, high school, college. Again, click on the link, you get the story. I could do a whole webinar on this, but I want to go through quickly to get through everything. And we've been doing some really interesting things with this. For example, the Adirondack History Museum had their History Day, and they invited me to do a day on Adirondack history. And, I wondered, can I fill up a whole day with all these stories? I mean, I hope you found the first few or parts interesting. And instead, COVID turned into a webinar at night. And I said, have dinner with me and just listen. But what I did was I envisioned myself in the museum, where I've been a lot of times, and if you haven't been, it's a great place to go. And I started with, I'm in the basement with all the old carriages and bicycles, and see that bobsled over here? I'm going to play you a story about an Olympic bobsledder from Keene who won the gold medal. And then I played that story. I said, walk up the stairs on the left, the 46ers room, about hiking. See that picture on the wall of historic guy Jim Goodwin with 2 pack baskets on his back? Hear his nephew tell his story and walk through the museum, playing a story that related to just about every exhibit as a way of enhancing the collection in the museum and showing how stories could be used. Adirondack Experience, when they were planning the From Wilderness to Warfront story, came to me. And first, we sponsored a day where people brought in any World War II artifacts they have so they could loan them to the museum if they thought they could use them. But I also sent a spreadsheet of stories about World War II from the Adirondack Community collection. And from that, they discovered Private Charles Smith, who recently died, who did 6 stories, 4 of them about his World War II time, that are amazing, connecting so many families in our community. You can listen to them on Adirondack Community. Charles Smith. His daughter Darlene reads from his memoirs, but he was there. He recently died. And so Adirondack Experience found him before he died, recorded him. There's a section of the exhibit on him. It's these collaborations and these partnerships that make our story bridge so strong. What are we doing next? We're presenting to librarians, teachers, museums, historical societies, architects, anyone who wants to hear about what we're doing, because that's how we're growing. That's how we create awareness of the free resources. That's how we generate interest in starting our StoryBridge projects and using the stories with students. We provide free one-on-one assistance to anyone who wants it. We have all kinds of partnerships. I looked at chat and I saw someone, maybe it was Christy, put in Consider the Source New York. We are working with Consider the Source New York. We also, as of this week, are working with America 250, the congressional chartered organization that is planning the celebration of America's sesquicentennial, our 250th anniversary. And we're specifically working with their tribal communities section, but also in general. We have just partner with anyone that we can help and they think we can help them. And it's been really interesting. We promote and expand the teacher's guide. I ask you, if any of you are in school, have kids, or involved with your schools, send them to the teacher's guide. It's a way to teach New York heritage. It's a way to teach more than that. And the stories from Lake Placid are in the teacher's guide as well, as are Tremonton, as are Igiagig, and everyone else coming online. We'll continue the PR and marketing program. We have, for Adirondack Community, a Facebook page. It's called Adirondack Community Story Project. You can, connect there if you're on Facebook, connect your organization to that page. And curated stories appear twice a week with seasonal themes or themes that have to do with what's in the headlines. And we also have in our StoryBridge Facebook page, where we teach people how to use our StoryBridge, and we post stories too. We have an e-newsletter for our StoryBridge that gives you the latest information and hints. We're always looking for people to test and improve our tools and resources. We're a volunteer-run organization with some money to keep the website going and the updates of things and travel to some conferences. But any of you who find this interesting, I'll talk in a minute about things you can do. And what else we're doing is we apply for grants, generate funding to grow this and have staff as we move forward. So if this has been interesting to you, and you or someone you know wants to think about starting a story project, check out myadirondackstory.org. Check it out anyway, because you'll probably love the stories and Lake Placid Narratives. And then check out OurStoryBridge.org with all the details on how to do it. Too many details, but communities say it's a great resource. Listen to some stories. Dig into the toolkit. Fill out the form on the OurStoryBridge website or email me. And I'll be right back to you or someone else who's volunteering with me to help you decide whether to get started and to start you. We need you to be your voice. I probably said it too many times, but we kind of run low budget, no budget to do something that's right now big and national. We've also helped a lot of organizations get grants to do their own story projects. Be our voice. Listen to the stories. Guide others to our StoryBridge if you think they're interested in starting a project. Put links to our StoryBridge and Adirondack Community and Lake Placid Narratives and any of the others on relevant websites. Show patrons in your libraries, in your organizations, especially students, the websites, so they can listen to the stories and podcasts. Even with students, listen to the stories by kids and the 8th grade podcast. We expect to have a second 8th grade podcast up by June, in June. Introduce local teachers to the teacher's guide. Volunteer to help us. follow and like the Adirondack Community Story Project in our StoryBridge Facebook and Instagram pages. Send names and emails of anyone you think might be interested in our e-newsletter. They can always unsubscribe. You can always unsubscribe. And if you have ideas for grants and other funding sources, please let me know. You know, as I said, we have some grants, but we're running a national effort, so we can use all the help we can get. The email to use to get to us is createyourstoryproject@gmail.com. Let's do some questions, and if we have time, I can even play a couple of stories if you want to stay on and listen.
My heritage did start a couple years ago taking oral histories, but they were overly long, and it kind of got passed on to somebody, and she did awesome work in transcribing in that, but it was not the desire of her heart, and it turned out to be absolute drudgery. But I have like 25 full things. But I know I want to do something with my heritage room, and I know we've recently lost a lady that she knew more about the history in the area than anything, and she now has Alzheimer's and has forgotten more than we'll ever know. And I don't want to repeat that with the people I have working now as historians in our community. So I'd like to start with them. But is there a way too that we could possibly maybe take minutes of what we already have and put those up?
Well, you know, our e-newsletter that went out yesterday answered that question. And what it said was that if you have existing oral histories, you can cut them into 5 or 6 minute sections with the most enticing parts and upload them to Memoria, which is a platform the stories get recorded on. And that way you can use it to have your news stories of the past and the present interspersed with stories that are cut from larger oral histories that you've already taken.
Okay.
So that would give you more use of things you've already done.
Done, yeah. And it would maybe also be a way to maybe help it and get it out that this is what we're looking for other people to come and do.
Exactly.
If I could get it on my page.
And the user guide explains all that. I see a question from Brian about the photos. So the photos can come from a storyteller who brings them. And if they're not digital, I just take a picture with my iPhone and upload them to the story. But we work with our archives in Keene, and as soon as someone tells a story, we send an email saying, hey, we just took a story about blank, blank, and blank. And they send us photos to pick from. We upload them. A story can go up the day someone tells it. We also, sometimes if we don't have stories, we find some stories in ways that we can legally use photos. I make some suggestions on how to do that in the user guide. Sometimes they're just pictures around town I take that, you know, fit into a story. But our archives are really happy, and they've been really involved because they're getting more activity because of this, and they're really involved with it. So thank you for that question. Any other questions? And if you want to listen, listen. And if there's anything else you want to say, just put a note in the chat and we'll come back to you. Okay? So here is Alice Zachar from Igiugig, Alaska's story.
My name is Renee Zachar, and I'm going to tell a story about my mother-in-law, Alice Zachar. Alice is and was an amazing woman. Alice isn't one to talk a lot, especially about herself. I've been with her son Greg for 30 years now and have been able to piece together a story about her from the few times she's talked about herself and from living with her for that long. Alice was born to Anuska, also known as Blind Grandma of Kaskanak, in May of 1932. She was the youngest of at least 2 children of her moms, whose names were Murphy Nikolai and Alice herself. Her dad's name, I don't remember what she said her dad's name was, but she had 2 children, but he had 2 children with a previous wife. The 2 children's names were Dolly Gust and Stefanita Apocalypse. They were Alice's sisters. Alice was very young, younger than 8, when she was taken from her mom and dad and hospitalized in Dillingham at Kanakanak Hospital for tuberculosis in her lungs and in her spine and knee. The TB in her spine eventually made her spine weak and bent her back and made her knee fuse together so it could not bend. Alice was also very hard of hearing and was not able to communicate with words very effectively due to hearing loss. She didn't speak Yupik or English particularly well. Alice and I learned over time how to talk with each other and communicate with a mixture of hand gestures and body language and Yupik English, and a Yupik English blend of easy 2 or 3 word sentences. When I first met Alice, I was struck by how fiercely she worked and how tiny she was. She had 2 3-gallon buckets she would pack up the hill to her steam bath. She would fill them each half full and make at least 7 trips to fill the hot and cold water containers, and she wouldn't let me take them away from her and pack them myself. Later, when I had my daughter Alicia, Alice would pack her around even though she was a very big, heavy baby. Alicia's feet would trail along on the ground because she was almost as tall as her grandma Alice when she was 1. Alice used plant medicines for a lot of things, and I would follow along learning from her by watching what she was picking. Every once in a great while, she would speak with words about what each plant was good for or how to use it. Mostly, I would have to watch her use it to understand how to use it. I learned from her that she learned from her mother and also from a traditional healer named Mary Nowadik from Kokkinok. Alice had a strong faith in the Russian Orthodox Christian religion. She also used a blend of earlier native beliefs that she learned and ways of healing when she helped people who were sick. She would put water or tea or coffee on the soft spot of sick children and say a name of a deceased relative or ancestor and a Christian prayer, and the fever would leave the child. She would also tell me that no name could be put on the infant or child until after baptism in the church, and for at least a week or even longer, she would speak to the child as if that child were in reality that deceased person whose name she put on the child's head. I was skeptical, and I figured there was something to do with the water on the head that would help with the fever reduction, until I had a fever and nothing was helping to take the fever away, and Alice helped cure me of it. She told me she was sad that I did not get a name when I was a child and put water on my head and named me after my grandmother Matrona, who I had not ever met. My fever immediately left, and I started having memories that I believe were my grandmother Matrona's. The last healing type of thing that Alice did for us before she started to get dementia really bad was a blessing outside, using a bird wing and smoke from a campfire. She used the wing to pull away the bad and cleansed us with the smoke. She said the prayer and blessing in Yupik. She also said I was to be able to do what she was doing and to remember the things she taught me and to teach someone else. Koyana for listening to this story about Alice.
Koyana is thank you in Yupik. And thank you for hanging in there and listening to Alice's story. I hope you'll all get in touch with any questions you have. Look at the resources. I really appreciate your coming to listen. And I look forward to a continuing relationship. I pass it back to you, Christy.
Thanks again. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be well.